Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. We're going to start in a few minutes, so let's wait for some more people to join in, and we'll begin shortly. Welcome, everyone. For all those who've just joined, we will start the session shortly. Uh, just to allow for as many people to join in before we begin. Good evening, everyone. I think we'll start this session in 2 minutes. All right. I think we can start now. Uh, okay. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone who's just joined in. We're happy to have this session on low emission hydrogen that's organized by Third Derivative as part of Climate Startup Week 2024, which is the April edition. So huge shout out to the Third Derivative team, Chetan, Amy, for putting this session together, and we look forward to an insightful discussion presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Raivat Singhania, a panelist who will be presenting uh, from Third Derivative. And what he does at Third Derivative is develops techno-economic models to analyze the economic feasibility and areas for cost reduction in various clean energy technologies with expertise in the hydrogen sector. So he also develops investment briefs for Third Derivative's large portfolio of investment partners to encourage investment in next generation clean energy technologies. So over to you, Ravi.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Rishi, and thanks everyone for having me. Excited to present to you all. So let's jump straight into it. So why low emissions hydrogen? Why now? So I think all of you would have heard by now that hydrogen is a key tool to decarbonize several hard to abate sectors if the economics work out, even as soon as 2030. So from a market opportunity perspective, low carbon hydrogen could provide 24% of our energy needs by 2050, providing up to 11 trillion in infrastructure investment opportunities at a yearly rate of yearly annual revenue opportunities of about $2.5 trillion. It's a key feedstock in several industrial processes, as I'll go over later, with significant momentum towards utilizing hydrogen in these industries as mounting regulatory pressure and social pressure to decarbonize continues to increase. Producing hydrogen is currently mature at the industrial scale. However, the current method of producing hydrogen doesn't align well with net zero goals. So something really needs to be done, not only for the production of hydrogen itself, but also to fully realize green hydrogen as a decarbonization tool in terms of its abatement potential. The economics really need to work out, and it needs to be net zero, obviously. In terms of a climate impact perspective, so heavy industry accounts for nearly 40% of global CO2 emissions, with sectors like cement, steel, and chemicals leading the way. Hydrogen is a key feedstock in all of these three industries that I mentioned, whether it's a feedstock for chemicals, or if it's a reducing agent for steel, or even a fuel for high temperature heat in certain situations. Based on our analysis, the scope of hydrogen's impact on decarbonization could be as high as 20 gigatons of CO2 per year. This is obviously pending attractive unit economics and certain infrastructure issues solved, such as storage and transport, which we'll also touch on in this presentation. So there are several key drivers motivating green hydrogen production. Firstly, most low carbon hydrogen productions are forecasted to decrease in price by 50% in this decade, according to several reports. And there's been quite a bit of public investment. Over 37 billion has been committed through 2030, and the private sector has committed at least 300 billion, according to the IEA's Global Hydrogen Review. From a policy perspective, there's lots happening across the world. I'll pick on 3 points here. In the US, the Hydrogen Shot Initiative and the Hubs Initiative under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act have committed over $8 billion. In the EU, the HY2Infra projects and several state-level green hydrogen policies have committed over $7 billion. And in India, the Green Hydrogen Mission, launched in 2022, has allocated $2.3 billion for the development and rollout of green hydrogen in various sectors in the Indian economy. So global hydrogen production today is mostly, over 99% of it is gray hydrogen or black hydrogen. That is natural gas derived hydrogen that's produced through steam methane reforming, or coal-based hydrogen produced through gasification. Global hydrogen demand peaked at 95 million metric tons in 2023, but the bulk of this was met by these carbon polluting production sources. Several analyses, as shown as on these graphs on the right, have shown that in a further acceleration situation, hydrogen could actually be produced at a rate of nearly 600 million metric tons per year, according to McKinsey. And even in a fading situation, which is really not the situation that we're in, the momentum of hydrogen is only picking up. It's still over 100 million tons per year by 2050. As you can see, in all of these situations, the phase out of gray hydrogen is pretty much guaranteed, and it's not something that we want to obviously continue producing into the next decade. In terms of end uses, the bulk of hydrogen is used in ammonia production and oil refining today. Oil refining should shrink as an industry, but ammonia, especially green ammonia, is only growing, and it has shown in a lot of reports recently that's going to be a vital tool for net zero, for the net zero global economy, and similarly for green methanol. Ammonia has been gaining a ton of traction, especially in the maritime shipping industry, and I believe 13 ammonia-fueled ships will be online by later this decade, around 2026, 2027. So ammonia is gaining a lot of traction, and as a byproduct, hydrogen is, since ammonia is directly produced using hydrogen. The future use of hydrogen is going to look fairly similar, but there are also going to be some rapidly growing spaces, such as mobility. As you can see here on the graph on the right, mobility is probably going to be the fastest growing sector for hydrogen over the next few decades. And ammonia production will also continue to use hydrogen and ideally transition to low carbon hydrogen. Some additional newer use cases for low carbon hydrogen would be industrial heating, so replacing gas and coal furnaces and boilers with hydrogen-based heating. E-fuels, hydrogen can be used for several different types of e-fuels across aviation and maritime, and like I mentioned, ammonia for maritime fuel applications. FCEVs are mainly going to be restricted to medium and heavy duty transport vehicles in our opinion. And this has been shown with China aggressively rolling out their goal of 100,000 FCEV heavy duty trucks by 2030. Steelmaking is another huge opportunity. Steelmaking accounts for 3 to 4% of global emissions, and clean hydrogen could potentially decarbonize that with a lot of interesting solutions in the space, and a lot of great companies working on that problem. Long duration energy storage is a potential application for hydrogen once the further rollout of renewable energy is done, and renewable energy is more widespread than it is today. McKinsey's analysis agrees fairly well with our own in that new mobility and industrial heating will dominate new applications of low carbon hydrogen by 2050. And even in a fading momentum situation, you still have quite a bit of growth over the current market, nearly a 2x growth by 2050. So the opportunity in this market is huge, even in a fading situation, which again we are not in. From our view, the best uses for low carbon hydrogen up to 2030 are going to be in steel and chemicals. So steel, obvious one, you can do direct reduction of iron using hydrogen and eliminate the carbon dioxide component. And the chemicals uses would be ammonia, methanol, and electrofuels, which somewhat overlap each other and are somewhat separated. Maritime shipping is another big industry, but falls under ammonia. The idea of hydrogen being used as a fuel cell type application in maritime shipping is extremely unlikely. The density and the power output of current fuel cells just don't seem to be able to keep up with the power needs for maritime shipping. And heavy duty transport is another opportunity. However, it's not exactly 100% clear if it's the best solution available, with electrification on the table and a lot of companies and startups pushing for battery swap type solutions where you arrive at a refueling station, which is really just where they take out a modular battery and stick in another one, and that may end up being a more economic solution in the long run. Aviation is mainly going to be reliant on the cost of carbon capture to produce e-fuels and really acquire low-cost CO2 to produce those e-fuels. And seasonal energy storage, like I mentioned, is a strong opportunity as the power grid is further decarbonized and we have a larger penetration of renewable energy. So in a India-specific situation, hydrogen is already extensively used and has immense latent demand potential. Several boards, including TERI, ICRA, and the IEA, have all projected massive hydrogen demand growth in India. As you can see on this figure on the right, a 5x growth over the next couple decades. Almost all hydrogen today in India is used in chemicals for urea production. As I'm sure many of you know, India is the second largest producer of ammonia and urea-based chemicals in the world. And something that's not shown in the figure is India's steel making and the potential of hydrogen in the steel industry in India, which would grow from a few 100,000 tons used today to over 8 million metric tons per year used by 2050. Another thing that's not shown in the figure is the immense potential of solar and wind in India. And it's very possible to imagine India being a net exporter of electrolytic low carbon hydrogen in the near future. Curtailment is a problem in a lot of Indian states. It's as high as 30% in some seasons and some times of the day. So storing this electricity in a demand response scenario are some solutions, like using battery backups. But green hydrogen generation is also a very interesting opportunity during curtailment hours, especially if further technologies like liquid organic hydrogen carriers and efficient ways to store hydrogen arrive sooner, because then you could effectively store this curtailed energy as a liquid and then use it when you need to, eliminating any kind of waste. So now that we've gone over a little bit of an introduction to hydrogen and its potential and a view of the Indian market, let's go over some of the production pathways and technologies available in this space. So some of you may have heard of the hydrogen rainbow. There's a lot of different colors of hydrogen. You have pink hydrogen, which is nuclear, you have yellow, you have gold, and all different colors, but we're going to be focusing on these 4 colors primarily for the bulk of this presentation. So the incumbent technology is steam methane reforming or autothermal reformation. This is where a fossil fuel feedstock, typically natural gas, is fed through a industrially mature process at this point to produce hydrogen. Effectively, it's cracking the natural gas, which is a CH4 molecule, and pulling out the hydrogen, the H2, from that molecule. This produces a lot of carbon dioxide in the process because you're pulling that carbon off the CH4, and carbon doesn't really like to exist on its own in this kind of situation, so it oxidizes quickly and produces CO2. Blue hydrogen is the exact same process with carbon capture added to it. And turquoise hydrogen is a very interesting opportunity because it uses a similar feedstock in that it uses natural gas, but it has the potential to be zero carbon due to its synthesis process, whereby the methane is effectively thermocatalytically broken down into a solid carbon product and hydrogen gas. Green hydrogen has a few different pathways. So generally starting with water and renewable electricity, you have direct water splitting, which is fairly difficult to do. It's being done, but not on any kind of scale that's economically or commercially relevant. So this would be photoelectrochemical processes and thermochemical processes, and I'll get into that a little bit more in the future in the next few slides. And the bulk of green hydrogen generation today is through an electrolytic process where you're electrolytically breaking down water into hydrogen and oxygen. And if these processes are fed with renewable electricity, it is green hydrogen. A few other pathways to hydrogen, which are relevant, especially in an Indian situation, is waste biomass gasification, which has gained some traction in India over the last few years. This has the potential to produce green, blue, or gray hydrogen, depending on the feedstock, how it was grown, the off gases from the process, and how that's managed, as well as black hydrogen, which is coal gasification, as I mentioned previously. Another interesting opportunity that is a little bit more nascent and will require some time for development, but potentially could be a primary method of hydrogen production in the future is microbial electrolysis of wastewater. So there's a lot of organic molecules and compounds in wastewater that have hydrogen attached to them and could theoretically be extracted. Um, Microbial electrolysis is really interesting because it's using living organisms to actually perform that chemical reaction and extract the hydrogen from wastewater. And this would naturally result in green hydrogen as long as the electricity provided is renewable. The major wildcard, which is really hard to speak on today, mainly because it's lack of exploration, is geologic hydrogen. Has a lot of names: natural, white, gold hydrogen, whatever you want to call it. It was discovered in the late 2000s. It's taken a while for it to actually enter the spotlight, primarily because in the late 2000s, no one was really excited about hydrogen as a decarbonization solution, and that's changed drastically over the last 10 years. Estimates of how much there is on Earth vary significantly, but some estimates say up to 10 trillion tons around the world. And these same estimates also claim that it's geographically widespread and not co-located with oil and natural gas containing formations, meaning that mining this hydrogen in theory shouldn't result in further emissions. There's been little exploration, but there are a handful of companies now in the exploration and early production situations for geologic hydrogen, but it is a little bit of an unknown on where these seeps are and how to exactly access them, how deep they are. So there's a lot of unknowns with white hydrogen, but in theory, this could undercut the costs of any kind of production method we could come up with today, mainly due to the decades of knowledge in oil and gas on how to drill for reserves such as this under the earth. This is a map of the current believed areas of hydrogen or white hydrogen reserves around the world. There are significant resources found in Eastern Europe, but this is not because it's geologically rich or particularly geologically rich area of the world, but that's because that's where the most exploration has happened and that's where it was recorded. A similar concentration of geologic hydrogen is expected in most areas of the world based on early analysis. So out of the low emissions hydrogen generation technologies, they are separated into a few buckets. So we have alkaline electrolysis, which is the most mature green hydrogen generation technology, widely deployed at the gigawatt scale across various industries and countries. And then we have a few commercial and pre-commercial technologies, which are proton exchange membrane, or PEM electrolysis, methane pyrolysis, as previously mentioned, and solid oxide electrolysis. Solid oxide electrolysis, just a few years ago was thought as, it's something that's going to maybe compete with AEM. But now in the last few years, it's actually overtaken AEM and has abated some of the issues that it had previously, specifically to do with the lifetime of the system, and is approaching a 50,000 hour system lifetime now in a lot of situations, and really competing with alkaline electrolysis. And solid oxide electrolysis benefits, without getting too much into the technicals here, it benefits from operating at a higher temperature, meaning you can save some energy in the actual production process and theoretically undercut conventional electrolysis methods. We also have a couple newer technologies, that being anion exchange membranes or AEM electrolysis. The benefits of AEM is, in theory, you don't need any platinum group metals or corrosive electrolytes. They are a lot smaller, low cost, and they operate at high pressures, which I'll get into why that's important in a moment. But some challenges with AEM are the lack of maturity, and then the membranes. They use complicated bipolar membranes, and these are expensive and difficult to make last, 80,000 hours, which is the gold standard set by alkaline electrolysis, and catalyst degradation. Thermochemical is a very interesting opportunity, mainly because it'll become more and more enticing the more we roll out renewable energy. Efficiencies up to 50+% have been recorded in a closed loop fashion, which is environmentally friendly. And the key challenges in this space are reducing some operating temperatures. Some thermochemical pathways operate at temperatures, over 1500 C. So that makes the reactor design challenging, and then the cost of actual concentrating arrays is quite high currently. Excuse me. PEC, or photoelectrochemical electrolysis, is the idea of using photons directly from the sun to split water. This is a very difficult technology to actually bring to market. This is what I conducted research on in grad school. It's really exciting, it's really cool, but the economics and the challenges around catalyst stability and semiconductor lifetimes are very, very early in the development. And it's interesting, but there's a widely held view even in the academic community that the prospects for some most successful commercialization is pretty low, and PEC might be relegated to extremely specialized uses, such as uses in space or areas where some of these other technologies just wouldn't work. But it would not. The idea that it would be a large scale commercial hydrogen production process is pretty far from the truth at this current moment. If there are huge jumps in material science and development in this space, that could change, but as of this time, it doesn't seem likely to be a commercial hydrogen technology. So this is more of a reference slide that I hope will be of use to the people in this call and beyond. And basically lists some key performance indicators of these different technologies. So the TRL, obviously, just writing down the technology readiness level. The levelized cost of hydrogen is averaged from our TEA that we conducted internally on these technologies, as well as TEAs conducted by independent research groups and bodies. So service pressure, temperature, and efficiency are three really important metrics for these production pathways. Service pressure is really important because I'll get into this a little later, and I'll show you a nice graph which kind of exhibits this, but compression losses as a percentage of the lower heating value of hydrogen are pretty high. You can lose up to 16% of the lower heating value, so 16% of the total energy you would get from combusting hydrogen is lost in compression when compressing to 1,000 bar, which is the general pressure required for gaseous tank storage. Even getting to 30 or 50 bar is a huge energy saving. So technologies that can produce hydrogen at pressure, such as alkaline electrolysis, PEM, AEM, have an advantage in this sense, in that the post-processing of the hydrogen to actually store it in a feasible manner requires less energy as a result of producing hydrogen at pressure. The cold start time is important when thinking about pairing these technologies with renewables. Basically, the cold start time can be thought of as if you have a power outage and the system goes down, how long is it going to take to warm back up and actually start producing hydrogen again? So this is where the benefits of things like PEM electrolysis are immediately obvious. And there's a reason why it's being developed, is because it pairs with renewables more favorably than alkaline electrolysis. And then the lifetime is the typical service life of a unit before undergoing major maintenance or replacement. Output purity is a factor. It is generally difficult to separate and purify hydrogen because of how small the molecules are. So generating high purity hydrogen straight out of the electrolyzer is definitely a benefit. And the purity of the hydrogen generated by these different technologies varies quite significantly. And another reason why PEM is being explored is because it automatically puts out very, very high purity hydrogen. In terms of production cost today, green hydrogen is pretty much more expensive than gray hydrogen in every single country looked at, varying from around $2 per kilogram to up to $12 per kilogram in areas with less renewable energy penetration. However, the forecasts indicate that it's going to be cheaper than gray hydrogen in 5 markets by 2030, and cheaper than blue hydrogen in many more markets by 2030. Given the relative immaturity of some of the technologies mentioned, of the direct water splitting pathways, establishing some meaningful costs for those is a little difficult today. And the TEA and the LCOH numbers on the previous slide need to be taken with a grain of salt, but they all have the long-term potential to be cheaper than incumbent technologies like AMR, SMR, and coal gasification. Turquoise hydrogen is also a very new technology, so there aren't any reliable cost estimates that are public today. But it is possible to produce hydrogen through turquoise methods at an even lower cost, and it produces a useful byproduct in carbon black, which has applications in electronics, in the industrial setting, and future applications of carbon nanotubes and things like that, as the actual production process of that carbon black can be modified to produce structured carbon instead of just carbon black. So the potential use cases of turquoise hydrogen and the byproduct could be massive, especially as carbon nanotubes and more advanced carbon structures are being looked at for things like carbon capture and more advanced catalyst applications. This slide kind of combines and summarizes the last few slides. So basically the main takeaway is that by 2030, 2040, most of the technologies we've talked about will come into price parity with SMR. The exceptions to this rule, which are, I think the estimates on this slide may be a little bit overzealous, are for AEM and thermochemical, just because of their early technological development at this current time. But here you really see the potential of methane pyrolysis and how much it can actually undercut the current incumbents and also potentially undercut green hydrogen. It's definitely market dependent. The cost of natural gas will play a large role. This is just looking at production costs and not the cost of the feedstock. So methane pyrolysis will definitely have its part to play in the future hydrogen economy. And in certain markets, it will be the obvious solution to produce low carbon hydrogen, especially in the Indian market where there's large natural gas reserves, and geopolitics of the region makes sense for methane pyrolysis to really thrive in India. From our techno-economic analysis, we identified these four components that are the largest contributors to the balance of system. So the power supply, because of the nascency of electrolysis and all these different methods, and the lack of one coherent method means that a lot of power supplies are custom made for different applications. So economies of scale and standardization are needed here, but it should be a fairly simple problem to solve in the long run. Deionized water circulation is a large cost component due to the membranes and catalysts and various other components and electrolyzers being very sensitive to ion contamination in the water. So actually filtering that out is very difficult and leads to expensive filtration systems. From the founders that we've spoken to, cooling has been an afterthought in electrolysis, especially in alkaline electrolysis, and therefore has been a large component of the balance of system. So this is a part of the system that just needs optimization and further thought, thinking about a bottom-up solution to cooling rather than thinking about cooling as like, oh, there's heat now and we need to figure it out afterwards. A lot of startups that are in the alkaline electrolysis 2.0 type space are focusing on optimizing the cooling solutions. Excuse me. Processing is the last part, which is another big chunk of the balance of system. This is mainly, again, as I've mentioned, efficiency of compressors and purification systems are pretty bad. And this is mainly due to the small atomic size of hydrogen. And there's approximately a 2x energy demand for each compression step. And I'll show you this compression curve in a few slides here. But it's very difficult to compress hydrogen, and it's even more difficult to do it in any kind of efficient manner. So the hydrogen space is really, really exciting. We're living in a really explosive era of innovation across the value chain. There are over 250 companies and startups working on core hydrogen product innovation, and they're innovating on new production pathways, novel materials for catalysts and membranes, as well as balance of system optimization. And there are plenty of companies as well working on novel applications and end-use products of things like ammonia and e-fuels and various pieces of the value chain, as well as business model innovations to really bring hydrogen to a large market share and really allow it to live up to the potential of that 20 gigaton per year abatement potential that I quoted earlier. To kind of augment this innovation, I wanted to highlight two D3 startups that we're very excited about. The first being Aurora Hydrogen, which is working in the methane pyrolysis space. They've developed a really efficient methane pyrolysis technology for clean hydrogen generation, producing a carbon black product. And they're doing this using high efficiency microwaves, heating up carbon black, and then decomposing methane above that. It can be run in continuous or intermittent modes with variable renewable energy, and utilizes several innovations, including targeted microwaves, as I mentioned, as well as novel reactor designs to make this happen in an efficient way. The second one I want to mention is Power to Hydrogen. They are building a hybrid electrolysis system which combines anion exchange membranes and liquid alkaline electrolysis to deliver high pressure hydrogen on site, which will be ready for storage or transport. Combining these two electrolysis methods has a benefit, as you're taking the best of both worlds and reduces the capex of the system, and also allows for direct integration with variable renewable energy, taking advantage of the short startup times of AEM and PEM. The system also provides oxygen at a commercially relevant pressure and purity, which is, again, a byproduct of some of these hydrogen generation technologies that you'll see, that, again, benefits the unit economics and makes the product more likely to reach commercial scale. So I've touched on it a couple times, hydrogen storage and transport. This is a key piece to the puzzle, and really the penetration of hydrogen in the economy is not going to be anywhere near where it should be unless we figure out efficient ways to store and transport it, because the current methods of gaseous and liquid hydrogen transport are not going to cut it for a commercial scale, millions of tons per year hydrogen type economy. This is the graph that I was talking about a little bit earlier that I hinted to, but you can see that there's about 7% of a compression loss, just compressing 7% of an energy loss compressing to about 100 bar. And then the next 800, 900 bar, take another 7%. So if you can produce hydrogen at 100 bar, you're cutting out half of your compression losses. So that's one of the main challenges for gaseous and liquid hydrogen storage is the compression aspect. And if you're going to store it in tanks or for passenger vehicles, you're losing a significant chunk of your actual energy in the compression stage. And this can add to the cost at the pump, for example, for a passenger vehicle. So if you're generating hydrogen at $2 per kilogram, due to your compression losses and transport and all of that, you could actually be paying over $6 per kilogram at the actual user's end. Losses exist at pretty much every stage of compression. There isn't really a great compression system or technology on the market right now. So this is a problem and has resulted in the generation of a lot of different solutions for hydrogen storage and transport. So starting with the gaseous state storage, you have pressurized containers, which are your incumbent today, pretty cheap, but the containers themselves are quite expensive to manufacture. There's obviously a low volumetric energy density, so it's not exactly great for situations where large amounts of hydrogen are needed. And you have the safety factors of explosions and things like that you have to deal with pressurized containers. Some of the more natural solutions, I guess you could think of, are salt caverns, depleted gas fields, and rock caverns. These are great, economically viable today, but the issue is that the geographic spread of these formations aren't exactly evenly spread across the world. So some countries may be able to take advantage of gaseous state storage and salt caverns, but they may not simply exist in areas of the world. Liquid state storage, so we have liquid hydrogen. This is a decent hydrogen storage methodology for short periods of time and short distances. Boil off is a big issue, so you constantly lose hydrogen storing it as a liquid, mainly due to the cryogenic temperatures and our inability to develop insulation, or rather the economic inviability of developing insulation insulative enough to actually prevent boil off when there's a temperature difference of 250 degrees Celsius. Ammonia and LOHCs, so LOHCs stand for liquid organic hydrogen carriers. They're basically organic molecules that can bond with hydrogen and keep them in their chemical structure, while overcoming some of the shortfalls of liquid hydrogen, being that you don't need cryogenic storage, you don't need pressurized storage, and a lot of LOHCs can be handled in a similar way to diesel. So LOHCs and ammonia are going to be big solutions for long distance and long-term storage and transport. The key drawback of ammonia is obviously it's toxic. So there are areas of the world where governments don't want to deal with ammonia in any kind of largely populated area. And, underdeveloped technologies in general, the levelized cost of storage and transport really need to come down. But the geographic scope of these kinds of storage and transport solutions are not limited as some of these other ones are. Lastly, I want to quickly touch on solid state storage in metal hydrides. So these are porous nanostructured metals that can actually store hydrogen molecules in between the atoms in the metal. And these are exciting for like small volume type storage, but not really transport due to the weight of the metal itself. Very early on, very difficult to evaluate any kind of cost per kilogram for hydrogen storage or transport using this method. But an exciting space nonetheless, and just kind of accentuates how much work and how much effort is going into this space to really make it work. So I want to finish off with some final thoughts on green hydrogen in India. So India has announced a target to produce 5 million metric tons per year by 2030, which would be about 50% of the projected domestic demand. Currently, fiscal incentives mainly go to the production or the demand side of the green hydrogen market, but there is funding available for pilot projects in steel and transport for hydrogen utilization in those spaces. But demand side incentives across the world have shown great success in scaling up hydrogen. This has been seen in the EU and the US quite successfully, as well as Canada. And India is still formulating those incentives, but it's likely to be addressed soon, as it is a large missing piece. And given India's trajectory on hydrogen and how much funding has gone into this space, we do suspect that this will be addressed soon. So incentives for utilizing low carbon hydrogen in steel and urea production would change this demand scenario overnight. So it really requires quite a simple policy to pass for this situation to change drastically. The Indian policy currently is also pretty silent on transportation and storage innovations, another large missing piece, which we hope will be addressed soon. As I mentioned before, given the geopolitical relations of India and domestic gas reserves, methane pyrolysis could really be an exciting pathway for India in the future. In many situations, it's economical even without subsidies. So it is definitely a geographically dependent technology, but one that could really succeed in India. India also has some of the lowest renewable energy prices in the world and one of the fastest growing supplies of variable renewable energy. So there's good reason to believe that India can be a net exporter of electrolytic hydrogen and its derivatives if the storage and transport network is figured out quickly. Again, we can produce hydrogen, but if we can't store and transport it, it's not as useful. And producing hydrogen on site is not always the best way to do it. So we really need to figure out good storage and transportation economics. So there are a few areas where we believe that Indian startups can play a role and have already played a role. So it's membrane development for some of our proton and anion exchange membrane technologies, hybrid and alternative electrolysis technologies. One that's not mentioned here, but I meant to put was biomass gasification, which is gaining a lot of traction in India, storage and transport innovations, and then lastly, material science. So catalyst materials, better, more durable bipolar membranes, and things like that. Thank you so much for your time, and really hope that the presentation was insightful and useful for you all. I'm happy to take any questions, or you can also follow up with me afterwards over email. Happy to answer over email. I love talking about hydrogen, so please don't hesitate. So I see a few questions in the chat. So from Spiti on how does hydrogen compare to traditional petrol and diesel in terms of energy per liter? Um, it's comparable in its liquid state, but liquid hydrogen is extremely difficult to deal with. The majority of fuel cell electric vehicles which have come to market are using gaseous hydrogen, and they can achieve, large mileage. So I think the I forget the name, but Toyota released a hydrogen electric vehicle. I believe it has, 800 kilometers of range about there, but the tank is huge. So you lose in terms of storage space in the car, and you have other trade-offs. Um, in terms of energy per liter, it's theoretically higher, but again, that's mainly in a liquid form, and that's not really viable to use in a commercial or a commercial style car. So from Vasant, what is the production cost of renewable energy for each of those production methods? Sorry, I'm not 100% sure what you mean there. When you say production cost of renewable energy for each of the production methods, it shouldn't change depending on the production method. It would just be dependent on the cost of solar and wind energy generation. And two, would distributed production near to end use case make more sense than central production? In some cases, yes, but there are definitely going to be situations in which you're going to need long distance transport of hydrogen. And in some cases, the end use may not make sense. The end use may not have good access to solar and wind or renewables to produce low carbon hydrogen. So it's really a toss up. There's no real one right answer, which is why we need options. From Anant, who non-government, non-UN, ECC are funding hydrogen startups, and usually what size of investment? There's a lot. Climate VC has been exploding over the last 5 to 7 years. We mainly work in the TRL4 type development scale. So generally, we're looking at pre-seed, seed, and Series A investments. And these can range from anywhere to a few $100,000 to a few $1 million typically. Once you go beyond Series A, that's when the check sizes significantly increase, and you see tens of millions, and in some cases over $100 million for very developed technologies that are being deployed on the gigawatt scale. From Rohan Gala, do you think methane pyrolysis from CBG plants using biomass can be economically viable? So the tricky thing with biomass is, yes, it can be economically viable, firstly, to answer your question. But the tricky thing with biomass is it's quickly becoming a commodity product. It's quickly becoming something that a lot of different industries and different technologies in this race to decarbonize are trying to utilize to leverage and to use the inherent advantages of biomass to actually decarbonize certain processes or industries. Biomass gasification as a technology has struggled a little bit in terms of being able to gasify just anything. I think over the last 2 years, I've come across, tens of companies doing biomass gasification for hydrogen production. And the problem is that all of them claim it's waste agnostic, but it's not really waste agnostic once you actually dig into the technology. The other thing with biomass, especially in a country like India, which has quite a bit of food insecurity, is you're going to have to start justifying to the population growing energy crops over food crops, or using food crops for energy, which isn't exactly equitable and may not go down well with significant swaths of the population. So biomass can be economically viable, but has a lot of challenges, both from a technology perspective, but also from a social perspective. From Rohit, Indian green hydrogen guys very aware that producing a lot of green hydrogen requires sizable increase in grid capacity. This feels like a major bottleneck. Yeah, it definitely is a deciding factor. Being able to generate large amounts of clean energy are going to be required for hydrogen. So that is something that will have to happen cooperatively with hydrogen rollout. Otherwise, you're not really going to be generating much green hydrogen. Ashish, can you elaborate more on methane pyrolysis? Um, that's a bit of a general question, but I'll try my best. So methane pyrolysis is basically using thermal energy to break apart a methane molecule. The reason why this is economically, in theory, advantageous is because the methane molecule, which is CH4, has a much lower energy requirement to split the molecule into carbon and hydrogen. So for methane, it's about 10 kilowatt hours per kg of hydrogen required to split the methane. And for water, it hits a thermodynamic barrier at about 40 kilowatt hours per kg of hydrogen. So that's where the primary advantage of methane pyrolysis occurs, is it just has an intrinsic scientific energy floor that's lower than water, and as a result, has a theoretical economic advantage in certain situations. From Chris Peterson, is it possible to generate onboard hydrogen on demand? I'm assuming you're talking about onboard, meaning in a shipping situation. It may be possible, but like Aditya said in the comment, there's that reaction with aluminum and water to generate hydrogen, and there's a few other metals that react with acids to generate hydrogen. But yeah, perfect timing, Aditya. Requires a lot of metal to generate 1 kilogram of hydrogen. So its possibility in a shipping type situation to generate on demand seems unlikely, unless those ratios of metal to hydrogen get better. One thing that seems more likely is, long distance transport of hydrogen via ammonia, and then ammonia powered ships using some of the cargo that they're carrying to actually power themselves. Ammonia has its own problems, like it has NOx and SOx emissions, which are extremely damaging and need to be dealt with. But this is mainly in a catalytic converter type innovation that shouldn't take decades to fix. It should be fairly quick to solve the issues of combusting ammonia. The primary problem is if you want to transport ammonia as a hydrogen carrier, cracking ammonia is a fairly nascent technology right now, and is pretty energy intensive. So that would be a possible way to do onboard hydrogen. But cracking ammonia, like I said, is not exactly technologically mature right now. So from Rohan, what are the challenges of transportation materials as the gas is known to leak easily? Yeah, like I said, tank storage is expensive. I believe average costs range from $400 to $700 per kilogram of hydrogen stored. And when you compare that to solar, it's actually pretty good from dollars per kilowatt hour. But then you're not taking into account the actual cost of compressing the hydrogen, leaking, like you mentioned. And a lot of these more advanced tanks for high pressure hydrogen are composite materials like carbon fiber, which are labor intensive to manufacture, very, very sensitive to defects in manufacturing, increasing safety factors and increasing costs in QC and overall checking of the processes. So yeah, it is known to leak easily. It's one of the smallest molecules in the universe. So it is that is a problem that we haven't really been able to solve, which is why I mentioned that gaseous hydrogen storage is not exactly the best way forward. Salt caverns and underground type storage of hydrogen is more feasible, just because over millions of years, these caverns have become airtight. And they have become extremely resistant to any kind of leakage. And yes, like you said, transportation pipes would be challenging. However, they are feasible in certain economies, such as India, but mainly over short distances. If you're looking at pipelines that go across the world, like 10, 20,000 kilometers, you're not going to want to transport as a gas. These pipelines would either have to be already hydrogen pipelines, otherwise you're going to have to retrofit pipelines due to hydrogen embrittlement. Hydrogen embrittlement occurs in most metals. It's where the hydrogen leaches into the atomic structure of the metal and disrupts its properties. And the main thing it does is it makes it far more brittle. So that's obviously not great for a pressurized pipeline. So there are uses for hydrogen pipelines in short distance transport that are specially made for hydrogen, but existing infrastructure would either have to be retrofitted before it's used, or it would be not advisable to transport hydrogen in just a regular old natural gas pipeline. From Divyesh, how long do you think India could achieve the levelized cost of hydrogen to the $1 figure, and the most critical lever to achieve that? So I mean, I think hydrogen technologies will be hitting that area by around middle of the next decade, so 2035-ish timeline. I think the most critical lever is kind of standardizing the balance of system. As I showed on the slide, 50% of the cost of many of these electrolysis balance of systems is the power supply. And the reason that exists is because of the lack of standardization and economies of scale. So I think that would be the most critical lever. I think the rest of the problems to get hydrogen down that cost are engineering issues that are easier to solve than scientific issues. Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean, Anand, with your question. From Samarth, there are several startups trying to undertake green hydrogen projects around India. However, the market is currently dominated by refineries, and it is difficult to obtain offtake for the product even at the same price as gray hydrogen. Do you have any suggestions on how to approach offtake for hydrogen? I think, like I said, I think that's a regulatory problem. I think that the government needs to incentivize it, and once it incentivizes it, the demand side of this problem can change very rapidly. So, once they incentivize steel makers and cement makers and urea makers to actually utilize green hydrogen, I think that the offtake agreements will come quite quickly. From Rohit, has the industrial conversation finally moved past the lack of logic on blending H2 and natural gas pipelines? I believe so. I think that was a pretty bad stopgap type solution. And there's going to be blending limits for the same reason as I mentioned before, as in terms of hydrogen embrittlement, and then you have to deal with separation on the other end, and it's just a mess. I do think that the industrial conversation has kind of accepted that LOHCs and more streamlined processes for delivering hydrogen are going to be the longer term solutions, and blending hydrogen and natural gas is either going to play a very small part or not at all in the longer term hydrogen economy, in my opinion. From Hashish, take on hydrogen production sources in India. So like I said, huge amounts of renewable energy, massive rollout of renewable energy in India. So there's definitely potential for good, cheap water electrolysis based hydrogen. But as I also mentioned, there's a huge opportunity for methane pyrolysis. And this is mainly because of the geopolitics, relations with Russia and natural gas sources, as well as the natural gas resources that India has stored on its own. So I think there's multiple production sources. You could even explore thermochemical in central India due to the large number of days of sunlight that you get. Honestly, across the spectrum of the technologies I discussed, there are a lot of them could be economically viable in India. I do have a hard cutoff in about a minute, so I can take maybe one more question. So I'll take this one from Rohit. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that, Rohit. But yeah, my email is on screen. So if there are any follow-up questions that I didn't have time to get to today, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to chat.
Great. All right. With that, I think if there aren't any more questions, I think we can close this session. I'd like to thank Raivat specifically for really an insightful presentation, and yeah, and it's great to see the questions that are coming out and the participation from the audience. I think that's really encouraging to see, and I know There's a lot of work to be done in the hydrogen space. Raivat accurately pointed out the challenges on transport and storage, which is something that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. So we really look forward to seeing what's going to happen in the hydrogen space, and to see how India and what innovation from startups can really play a role in developing the technology and yeah, the future, hopefully. Great. So with that, I'd like to close the session. Thanks, Raivat, once again. Thank you to all those that have attended this session, as well as the team at Third Derivative. Great. We hope to see you all at another event that we do as part of Climate Startup.
Yeah, thanks so much for putting this on to the whole Climate Collective Foundation. I think India is a huge market and there's a massive opportunity for hydrogen. So really great to see also fantastic engagement from the attendees and yeah, thank you.
Thanks.